We will start this session with the lighting of the flame and 2-minute silence. The flame is also known as the children's fire. It represents all life on Earth and the next 7 generations. It serves to remind us all that everything we do is felt for the next 7 generations to come. I invite you all to take 2-minute silence to allow yourselves to contemplate not only the next 7 generations of human life, but of all interconnected life on Earth, that we must act in awareness of it.
I close my eyes and I can see a world that's waiting up for me, that I call my own. Through the dark, through the door, through where no one's been before, but it feels like home. They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say I've lost my mind. I don't care, so call me crazy. We can live in a world that we design. 'Cause every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams are keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. Oh, a million dreams for the world we're gonna make. There's a house we can build. Every room inside is filled with things from far away. Special things I compile, each one there to make you smile on a rainy day. They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say we've lost our minds. I don't care if they call us crazy. Run away to a world that we design.
Every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. Oh, a million dreams for the world we're gonna make.
However big, however small, let me be part of it all. Share your dreams with me. You may be right, you may be wrong, but say that you'll bring me along to the world you see, to the world I close my eyes to see. I close my eyes to see.
Every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head.
A million dreams are keeping me
A million dreams, a million dreams. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. A million dreams for the world we're gonna make.
I am Edward. I am a disabled XR rebel from the Newcastle area. I've got autism. I'm a wheelchair user. And I'd like to now pass on to Joe, who will introduce himself.
I'm Joe from Wales. I'll assist with tech and facilitate the discussion section.
I would like to introduce you to the two people on our panel for today's Q&A discussion on disability. They will also tell you any disabilities they have. I'll pass on to Emily first.
Thanks. I am Emily. I am a coordinator for the Disability Inclusion Working Group and also the Glasgow Justice Solidarity Group, Working Group. I'm a disability activist. I'm autistic. And autistic advocate for over 10 years, a political activist, and did freelance work in Africa as a teen. I've got Tourette's, I'm autistic, I've got mild learning difficulties, and I have a mental illness called emotional unstable personality disorder.
Hello, I am Linda, and I'm really excited to be here with these wonderful people today. I have several issues that cause my disabilities. I have fibromyalgia, which causes me constant whole body pain. I have osteoarthritis throughout my spine and most of my joints, which makes it hard to walk, although I can do it inside in my home as long as I have a cane or walker. I have depression, anxiety, and occasional panic attacks. And I also have an immune disorder that they haven't figured out exactly what it is yet. I am a member of XR Bad Acts in Wisconsin, USA.
Thank you. The definition of disability can range from mental health to physical disabilities. It may impact a person's movement, senses, and everyday activities. These may create barriers for disabled people when they go out and about their daily lives. Disablism can be defined as discriminatory, obsessive, abusive behavior arising from the belief that disabled people are inferior to others. Disablism refers to prejudice, stereotyping, or when they see or international discrimination against disabled people. For example, some people react differently when they see a person in a wheelchair. For example, thinking they're homeless, or if the disabled person has a carer, they talk to the carer rather than the person themselves. Assumptions about disability can lead to obsession. For insurance, the assumption that disability is always visible, which is not correct. For me, it is difficult because I'm autistic. I'm also a wheelchair user. I have had experiences of people talking to me like I'm homeless, talking to my carer instead of myself, or looking down onto me. Also, due to my autism, they think I'm rude because I can't cope with lots of stress, sudden changes. Some people like to talk about a certain subject. They're passionate about things and also cannot get bored easily in the same field each day. I sometimes can't understand people's sense of humor which causes me to get loud and distressed easily. I often find it very hard in busy shops. I try to focus on what I like to do and keep my mind busy on what's upsetting me. Talking about it with somebody helps. Other autistic people can get distressed. A cup of tea may help them calm down in certain situations. Now we've heard the background, I will now welcome the panel for the Q&A. Question 1. So the first question is, what do you know about the term disableism? Can you give any examples on disableism? I'd like to pass to Emily first.
Hi everyone. I'll talk about disableism. It is often interpersonal. A person does X to person Y, which is often similar. Most people think about racism and sexism and other isms. I would actually go to say that actually disableism, rather than ableism, because that's about able-bodied, which is actually a political term, an economic term, not actual term that actually denotes anything actual tangible, is actually an ideological bent in society that disabled people actually would rather you be dead, you be cured for for your convenience or society's convenience, or warehoused and segregated in different schools, businesses, and other institutions out of sight and out of mind. In other words, a lot of the public do not want disabled people to exist or interact due to inconvenience, fear, and other problems. Therefore, the problem with disableism is not just the act itself, it is the values of seeing disabled people as candidates for humanity, not actually fully human. They are broken, diseased, and other adjectives to describe us, but they do not see us as fully human. Where in other places and times, where when we talk about other minorities, there's of course those that speak up, that see the holes and see those as wrong and do things accordingly. But when it comes to disability, there are many sympathizers in inverted commas, to disableism, and have shrugged shoulders and apathetic and go, it's just the way things are. You've got a hard life because you're disabled. The fact of the matter is, and my final point, is that disableism is actually denying of people's needs in the most harshest and extreme way, either emotional, physical, or seen as included in society as a valuable human being. And all that stems from that, from, for example, interaction of someone not wanting to be your friend because they can't cope with you, mental health issues, bipolar, you name it, to physical disorders, physical conditions, and physical ailments of why are you with them, so for example, as a partner, to dealing with them in a shop, getting a ramp for them at a train, and other issues of accessibility in public transport, etc., all comes down to the fact that of the ideology of disableism. And until we recognise that, we will just be talking about the symptoms and not the actual true cause, the root cause of what those actions and behaviours come, both socially, governmentally, and in institutions like XR itself.
In America, where disableism is thought of basically as discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities, and ableism is discrimination in favor of people without disabilities. And according to the SCOPE website, the terms are used interchangeably by many people as they both describe discrimination against those with differing abilities. In my personal experience, disableism is more of a conscious choice and is frequently fueled by dislike and fear of those who are seen as different and therefore thought of as less than human. And it can be very difficult to change disableism within people and organizations. And ableism is more of a subconscious decision that's made based on things like how quickly to get a task completed, how uncomfortable it is to be involved with people who differ from ourselves, and a misguided attempt to help others who may not actually want the help, and so on. People who are ableist often will change their behavior with education if they can learn how powerful diversity is. Because of human discomfort with difference, disableism and ableism can be present within the disabled communities as well. Organizations in general are not inclusive of those who are differently abled because there are rarely people with disabilities included in the decision-making process within them. And organizations like XR and other activist organizations where activities can include hours-long, days-long, or day-long actions, the needs of disabled individuals who want to participate can be overlooked as a result. Decision-making should include those with differing abilities, and organizations of all types will need to be led by those with the desire to develop an inclusive culture within the organizations and who see the need for inclusiveness in public life in general. Not only does inclusivity help those who otherwise would not be able to participate, it sets a great example for other organizations in the general public. Thank you.
Okay, question 2. The next question is, what do people need to consider or think about and actually do when making trainings and events more inclusive? So I'd like to pass this to Linda.
Needs that should be part of the conversation include protection of health, including wearing masks and social distancing, accessible bathroom and self-care facilities like accessible showers, places to rest out of the weather, food needs for those who have allergies or other intestinal and stomach issues, and sometimes physical supports like pushing wheelchairs. I don't have an automated wheelchair, so my arms can get tired if we're going to be going for a long distance. The first aid needs of people with disabilities are overlooked sometimes as well, and that can lead people who feel very strongly about an action to avoid attending due to not feeling safe or that their safety is not a priority. The needs of those with mental health issues and other invisible disabilities are often neglected, as a common bias tends to be that if it is not seen, it is not there. Questions about individual needs by those who are setting up an action should be asked, but there may be people who find out about the action at the last minute and would like to attend, so the basic things that should be done include looking at health, safety, and accessibility.
Really, inclusion without adequate integration and involvement is just being there by proximity. What I mean by that is that you can do all that, but there's an element of accessibility we often miss, which is the culture itself. What I mean by that is, who is it disability led, as in the disabled people or a group or what have you, is doing it for the sake and safety and comfort of disabled people? Or is it for appeasing guilt and everything else from non-disabled people? And that is a big distinction. What is the culture of inclusion? And this is the problem I've had both in terms of dealing with things in government, dealing with things actually in institutions, companies, and everything else, is it's a chicken and the egg. You need a culture change for them to see disabled people as relevant enough to put emotional and even physical and even monetary resources behind. But how can you do that when they go, well, it's how many people can't up? And I go, well, no wonder, because it's really hellish to get here. It's really inaccessible, and really, you made a dog's dinner, as we hear say in the west coast of Scotland, of the planning and organising of it. So it's basically chaos and too overwhelming for most disabled people. And the fact of the matter is, in my own personal experience, and something I need to be careful of, is people that are in disabled spaces or in positions of organising it do not become tokenistic or do not become an issue where anything disability related gets referred to that person, and there is no collective responsibility of the group, organisation or event organisers to actually have what I call habits of accessibility and inclusion. That means it becomes standard practice, not a quick scramble when a disabled person arrives. I've had that personally. Oh crap, Emily's coming. I'm like, oh right, so you're only doing it when I arrive, but when I arrive it goes back to abled by default. That means non-disabled person or able-bodied, whatever you prefer. So this is the problem, that for me personally, the accessibility needs to be very similar to how people talk about food in certain species, in green species, of there's a vegan option, there's a such and such option, we advertise it, we make it open for people, but we do not make a fanfare, or else all it is you're here in this side, in this thing with a little space for you, but you can't really interact with people.
So the next question is, what does radio inclusivity mean? What must happen for it to be achieved? We ask you to share experiences of disability and the barriers to inclusivity. So I'd like to pass to Linda.
A minimal definition of radical inclusivity that was posited by Kenton Fox in an article he wrote for the Hilltop Monitor in an opinion piece is one that I really like. His definition was as follows: a tendency to expansively modify boundaries in a way which creates a qualitative difference in the possibilities for engagement. Although the article was written specifically for those on a college campus, the definition can apply to any organization, company, or government. When people with differing abilities are included, not only do they benefit, but those who get to know and respect them have an opportunity to learn new things in ways that would otherwise be difficult or impossible. I've been disabled, progressively disabled during the last 20 years or so, and I like to think I was compassionate and supportive of differently abled people prior to my own experiences. I've learned a lot of lessons during my progressive disability. I was a registered nurse for about 30 years prior to my early retirement due to disability. I found that having to use a wheelchair has made some people speak to me as though I'm a naughty child, or that I might not be able to understand what they're talking about. And people are less able to meet my eyes when talking to me due to their own discomfort. I've had people be obviously impatient or even angry with me when I took longer than they thought I should to do something.
There we go, thanks Linda. I like that. I heard that definition as well. But also the word radical means to get to the root. It's from Latin. And I think we need to talk about why were they not included in the first place. And I think that's often not talked about, is that if you're not inclusive, you're exclusive. And often we forget about that. The fact is that I have always been disabled from a very young age. And that has affected me in lots of different ways. I am the 25% or so that are disabled by genetics and environment. The fact is that for me personally, a lot of these things are separate but equal. But for disabled people, well, you're not involved. Well, the disabled bit is over there. And that is, you're here, but not quite here. The fact of the matter is that radical accessibility needs to go to radical acceptance, as in accepting mind-body difference. What I mean by that is that everyone actually behaves differently, and actually the idea of normalcy in and of itself is actually a modern aberration that is impinged upon us by norms and values of society and those that own and operate parts of it. And the problem I've got is also who own and operate or are leaders, inverted commas, of movements. What is their priorities? Why are they including me? Is it to have a pat in the back? Or is it because they genuinely want my company in that space? For me, my barriers are not physical. Most of my barriers are social and interpersonal. For me personally, I need people to accept the way things are and accept me as a person, not seeing me as a walking problem to be solved. The fact of the matter is that radical inclusivity should include the idea that we should asking questions of why we're not included in the first place. Why do we not see them as valuable human beings to be included from the very outset? There's videos which I find interesting about radical accessibility is about from the very beginning asking who will come and who is missing when doing meetings and doing organising. What I mean by that is surveying the room. Is there any black people here? Is there any people that are LGBT? Is there any people that are in a wheelchair or disabled? And if they're not there, why aren't they there? What barriers persist? Is it cultural? Is it economic? What is the actual barriers to make them actually come? And make it attractive to come rather than guilt tripping them to be obliged to come by pleading and demanding to come for diversity. You make the effort and you ask, why isn't such and such here? They would like to go, but they said I had a problem with X, they had a problem with Y. That's unacceptable. That's an oversight.
For some of us, actually being at activities may be impossible, even with the right supports in place, but we can still help those on the front lines, which is a phrase that is overused these days. If we can't leave home to attend, we can still be involved with supportive activities like this discussion today, or doing computer work, or helping phone calls that need to be made to government officials or businesses. At a minimum, holding shorter actions and actions that are in local areas can help those of us who would like to attend. One of the strengths of XR is that local actions are encouraged, and very few people can attend and still have an impact in our communities. Although larger actions get the television coverage that helps people understand what climate change means to the future of many species, including humans. Understanding the self-care needs of attendees should top the list of ways to decrease barriers, and we know what we need, so ask us. Including us in the planning of activities also makes sense because of our knowledge of how different places can impact our ability to participate. It's important that differently abled people are able to give feedback on what worked and what didn't work for us following actions as well, so that the next time those things are fixed so that we can be included more and more.
Thank you, Linda. Also, there's one point I'd like to put across that we need to think about disabled toddlers and accessibility to toddlers in protests and activism. And I'd like to pass over to Emily.
Oof. One of the biggest problems of XR, well, London and others, is what happened in London with October Rebellion, where all of our stuff got confiscated, but there was no social infrastructure. What I mean by that is very little training, very little understanding of disability issues, and very little backup when things went wrong for disabled people. There was a solidarity march, but the problem is that a lot of it was performative. We put in the work in, we begged and pleaded people on Twitter to actually publicise us protesting Scotland Yard, which is actually the head of the police forces in England and Wales. Scotland's got a different one, ironically enough. And the fact is that the issues of disabled rebels that went to that in terms of the Met Police and the issues therein of the worst case of police brutality was not widely discussed. And I've been part of groups locally and internationally and nationally that did not have time or felt they had time to discuss what really happened to disabled rebels, the scale and scope of the abuse by police and inadequate and basically haphazard way of actually dealing with the actual protest. So in that regard, I would actually say to a certain point that at least in the UK, there is sadly, and I hate to say it out loud, inherent structural disableism, both in terms of how XR operates and how XR actually dealt and brushed under the carpet after the event with these words what actually happened to disabled rebels. And the very fact that the same mistakes kept on happening, where's the learning and reflection? And the very fact is, I am challenging rebels that are listening to this right now to go, well, why wasn't any listener there? Why wasn't it people owning up that we actually failed a minority of disabled and a big minority, which is disabled people, in a systematic and sadly rather obtuse way? And what I'm basically trying to get at is there's no point in inviting disabled people, promising supports after pouring blood, sweat and tears and having to justify it to an abled, non-disabled person why they're actually needed, and actually putting some of my friends in disabled network in the UK to actual tears and a breakdown, to the very fact that when those were taken away, it was a facade. There was nothing underneath of comprehension. And we need to understand that for me, we're talking about radical inclusivity needs to come from culture and trainings to understand disability issues and disabled people as people. So for me personally, when we're talking about accessible protesting, I've had people say to myself, well, if it's so bad for disabled people to come and so risky due to UK police issues like the Manchester police anti-fracking protests, then why do you want to go in the first place? And then, in the same breath, turn to somebody and talk about, for example, how to deal with the radicalisation of police and profiling people that are in the BME community and keeping them safe. And I was like, hold on a minute. How come that when you're talking about this specific issue, you emotionally connect and go, that is unacceptable? But if a disabled person wants to go, well, if it's too dangerous, then don't bloody go. It's that double standard and hypocrisy that I see both locally and nationally in XR UK, which I actually find both extremely exhausting and actually traumatic. The fact of the matter is I have been to talks like this, and I've been to Zoom calls like this, and everyone nods their heads, and everyone does da-da-da-da, and yet the same mistakes, and the same hurt, and the same risk, unreasonable risk I may add, for disabled people continues. And for me personally, what you say is correct, Linda, but the problem of the matter is, if people do not have the backing of an organisation to follow them up emotionally, financially, you name it, and support them, it's nothing but an edifice of failure. And that is the whole point. And I want people out there to understand I've got sources for everything I have said. I have got sources at the wazoo. XR Legal try to take the Met Police to court. And I just want to make this very clear that this is not an attack. I did not go because I had a sad feeling about going down of lack of support for me as a disabled person because of past local protests. And for me personally, if I had that support and others had that support, I wouldn't be really as passionate, I don't know about passionate, but as incensed, that's the word, with the situation at the moment. And I just want to make that very clear that the situation on the ground, both now and in recent past, is unacceptable. And until we accept that we have failed and made statements and they come to us and go, we are sorry this happened and we're going to make it better and we're actually going to make sure that this is very unlikely to happen and we've got backups when things go wrong and emotional support. I don't want to hear about empty promises and euphemisms and sorries. Action needs to happen, not words, because words is cheap.
We've already heard some voices on the topics of inclusivity and disability and what is needed for society and organizations to become truly radically inclusive so that they are more fully inclusive and accommodating of disabled people in their everyday lives. So in this discussion, we will start with Emily. Emily.
Hi everyone. Sometimes I joke about Mr. Robots, like, yes, fuck society. For me, that's a kind of a really big can of worms to kind of open up, because when you know the state of affairs in the UK, it's one of the biggest bloody hills to climb as a disabled person. When disability charities are more concerned about their own profit and preservation and causing up to the government, when a lot of issues around disabled people either are ignored or they are outright minimised and gaslit, when a lot of these issues are seen as fringe, and I noticed that someone here was like, oh, I don't know how I could speak on that, and I find it very interesting that anything disability related, people are very scared to talk about it, when well, rather than other ones at least have a try, so that people have an idea of where they're at, their education in terms of knowledge and viewpoints. For me personally, I don't want this to be kind of like the 2 Hours Hate in 1984. I do not want it where a couple of disabled people kind of pull their hearts and souls out for everyone to see, and then everyone claps their hands and go, oh wow, isn't that a shame, and then goes back to their normal lives. What I'm really talking about is the fact that, for me personally, what's needed in society is a revolution and an actual proper movement in America and the UK of a disability rights movement. That's one thing. But the second thing is the very fact that we're missing in many different areas of understanding how things affect us in daily in not just daily lives, but when environmental disasters strike, there's a blind spot. When there is issues of accommodation, of actually accepting us as we are and having different needs, of our histories and our past being not recognised, and us as disabled people not recognised as an oppressed group, not a medical group, not a group of medical problems, not some technical group that we're not doctors, we're not nurses, we can't talk about that, and an actual socially, political, tangibly oppressed group. And until that's through people's skulls that we are oppressed, just like every other minority is oppressed, and the oppression is different and subtle and a lot more insidious, and until people get that into their heads, then it will be, oh well, you know, they've got this medical condition, blah 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 blah. Until people understand social models and models made by disabled people for disabled people, we understand disability politics, we begin to understand who we are as people, as a culture, as a group that as diverse as any other group and any other minority you can think of. Until we get to that point of, I want to understand your history, your point of view, your struggles, you as a person, to make sure that doesn't happen here. It's a safe haven here in this organization, this local group, that, you know, with me if we go out to a cafe. And until that line is crossed, when people get educated, people work on their biases, and I said in my talk on Wednesday, in my talk, until we realise that everyone in this society is a bigot and waiting for disabled people, that is the problem. As King said, it is not the words of our enemies that we remember, it is the silence of our friends. And our friends in this area have indeed been very silent, or if they've been selective on what they talk about in the ways in which they talk about, to not own up, like I said before, the issues they have created. The fact of the matter is that I can talk to them blue in the face until you come to me ready of me giving education and giving knowledge and giving understanding and affecting you emotionally, and can see me as a human being, not just the woman with Tourette's or the woman with autism or the woman with a mental illness, as Emily who has these needs, these things that are makeup. Until we get to that point personally, we cannot talk about radical inclusivity. We cannot talk about disabled people in our organizations, because we have disempowered, verbally and emotionally attacked, denigrated, alienated, and sadly even forced people to leave for their own mental and emotional and physical well-being out of that space, so there's no one left in some parts of the XR and wider environmental group to point to and ask, how do we be inclusive? Because we have buggered off, I would say, up here in Scotland, to start with ourselves and our groups and our attitudes and humanise different groups, especially disabled people. And until you come to me ready to go, right, I've heard you, I've not seen it as a performance piece, I've not seen it as a freak show, and then we clap, and then, oh, glad that's not my problem. Until you get to that point and go, you know what, you've moved me, Emily, you've moved me to action. I'm ready. What do I need to do to be inclusive, to involve you, because you're an amazing person that happens to be disabled? And until we get to that point, a lot of the points tonight are sadly mute. And I don't mean this to denigrate, I don't mean this to minimize or to be critical or to be a Debbie Downer, but I'm saying this is the process of my own personal experience and working for 10 years in this particular field and being disabled from a young age, of the process emotionally and everything else a group or an organisation or individual goes to get to that point of true acceptance of me as a person or disabled people, to then go, you know what, let's do it. And for me personally, that is the aim and should be the aim of every conversation moving forward, of removing ignorance, bias, and seeing disabled people as people, not as objects and everything else which I've gone into personally. I just want to leave that there, because we often jump the gun of how to include disabled people, when really we've not done the work in, like I said, to actually get to that point and actually have a balanced viewpoint on disabled people in our organisations. So I'll just leave that there. And it's up to you, Linda. And hopefully I've not mined out the conversation and viewpoint for you and go like, oh right, we haven't ended it, we'll talk about, you know.
No, I've been learning a lot as well here, and being able to think through some of the questions and how I personally have been impacted by people assuming my lack of humanity because I am just that thing in the wheelchair, or, you know, she always calls in sick because she just doesn't want to really be here. The idea that somehow I as an individual am worth less than someone else, that unfortunately seems to be part of the human way to put us in a pecking order, and often it seems like we end up on the bottom rung of that pecking order. And I agree that we should not be, you know, the picture of somebody who's disabled, and yay, we put that picture up, so now we're inclusive. And I think that being able to not even think about what I need, just being able to go to an action and participate in the way that feels best to me is definitely where I would like to see things go. And I'm very fortunate because one of the people that is in leadership for XR America actually started the group that I'm in, and she's also one of my carers. And so I have a direct voice into XR America. Absolutely, there's a lot of institutionalized stereotyping, and I would like that to change, and I hope over time it will change. But it is exhausting. It's exhausting to always have to fight for what you want and what you need. Going back to that whole business with the one shower for those of us that need to sit down while we're showering. Supposedly in our state government in Wisconsin, we have a place where we can talk to people about changing things in hospitals or other public buildings. And when I got in touch with them, they were very unhelpful. They basically told me that I needed to just go back and talk to whoever was responsible at the hospital. But our hospital is not the only one that has that kind of problem. So to me, that's a government issue, not a local issue. I'm very grateful that I have the ability to speak about what I need, and I can work to improve the communication between folks that are differently abled. Because I think the more that we get together and stand up for ourselves and speak out, the more we'll be able to impact the direction that our organizations, whether it's XR or the hospital or the government or wherever, the direction that moves. I really appreciate all the things that Emily has said, because I feel like she is helping me to learn more about how what needs to happen so that I can move conversations forward and make things better for everyone who wants to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm aware of time, so very briefly, I believe Lewis wanted to say a couple of things, or perhaps opening things up slightly. So, Lewis.
I'd really just like to thank everyone who's taken the time to organize this space, Joe and Edward, and Darren for helping us to understand and become as accessible as we can be in this space. And Maya and Heather as well. Maya, who's going to be helping us later, and Heather for a beautiful performance. But I imagine that these are tremendously difficult things to talk about, but it is incredibly valuable to have these experiences explained, because it's not something that people think of, and that discomfort is something that people won't address and wouldn't naturally address unless the actual experiences, the felt experiences, are explained to them. So I really must thank you for having the courage to talk about these things. But personally, I'd say that the thing I've taken away from this is that the making something accessible doesn't stop when you've got someone to an event, when someone's found their way to a space you've created, but that accessibility needs to continue and to be integral to all parts of that. And I was wondering how any specific things which should always be in a space, and anything that people might use to potentially deal with that thing which they might not understand, that they feel uncomfortable, that they, as you mentioned a few times, that they don't look you in the eye, they don't treat you like a normal person, because it's, I imagine, a difficult thing to deal with without understanding. I was wondering if you had any insights on it.
Are we stuck for time, Joe, or do you want? Do you want to go first, Linda, or do you want me to go?
Oh, so I go first. I was just going to butt in there and say,
Okay.
I was going to butt in there and say, really people need to understand the characteristics of them and try and ask them what they need to committee things. Maybe for a wheelchair user and this top person, maybe go down to a level that they are comfortable with. Give them time. Don't pressure people who are autistic. And for trainings and other things, include a break to allow disabled people to rest their eyes and go and all that. Because one thing that is really important, especially if you're partially impaired. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would just say a couple things really quickly. I think that it's important that everybody understand that every human being is human and that we all have our own ideas and thoughts and needs. And it's important to be understanding if for things outside of our actual control, we aren't able to make it to appointments or meet our goals. And don't assume that you know us because of what you can see or how we behave. Learn to actively listen. Don't be thinking about something else when we're talking. And we want to be asked before things are done for or to us. Please have meetings in locations that are accessible to everyone. And you know what? Speak up if someone is being bullied or otherwise discounted, no matter what the reason is. Be willing to imagine how different your life would be if you had my life, in other words, and work on being empathetic towards those who have differing abilities.
Thank you.
Anyone
else? Yeah,
I would just quickly say that for me, it's about making a relationship between the disabled person and the local groups and actual people organizing it. Obviously, it's different if someone hears about it on Facebook or Twitter and then it's like, oh, that was a good idea and turns up. But the whole idea is there should be guidelines, there should be a framework of understanding rather than, you know, the never-ending story of, all right, tell me your whole life, tell me how things affect you, and it's very emotionally and cognitively taxing, and they may not have the mental or emotional ability at that time to describe things in detail. And I think for me personally, it's about really having that, not just awareness, and I think personally it's about really having an understanding in relationship to difference and how, and actually getting what they want out of the event rather than what is you expect people to get out of the event, and also what if they got to leave, they got to leave, and all those different things. And I personally think that the worst issue I've actually experienced is feeling that if I have a problem, there is no safety net, there is no understanding, there is actually a risk me being there due to the complexity of my conditions, and there's not a space or time or a mechanism to deal with it either before the day or on the day to make sure that me being there is a threat to others or to myself. And I think until we think about the fact that safety is a multifaceted thing, and actually and a well-being of disabled people is paramount in other people, until we get to that point of, well, what is your needs? Not what is your disability, what is your impairment or disorders, what is your needs, what do you need from us? And when we get a relationship, we'll talk about those personal things later. And I think that is the thing, and as an organizer and as somebody that's done things before, the point I want to make across is if it's accessible at an event, should be accessible at a meeting, like you said, Linda, but also should be accessible in terms of phoning people, contacting people. This is what I need. And I've seen a lot of people not doing that. It's like, oh, you're doing whataboutism, or you're complaining, or you're just like too needy, that we've got scarce resources, making excuses for not attenuating and accepting and accomplishing what someone actually needs. And I would actually quite quickly actually say that for me personally, if you do not take the needs and the welfare of a disabled person that arrives on your doorstep at a meeting or there at an event, and you have no way to help them, you're excluding them directly, because you go, we never thought of someone like you arriving on our doorstep, and we have no tools, no understanding, nothing for you, so enter your own risk. And that is something that should not happen moving forward. And I think that is the main point I want to get across in this kind of conclusion, in this kind of discussion very quickly, is that is the point. If there's nothing for you, then this is not for you. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I would like to say a big thank you to our Q&A panel people, and as we finish, I like to blow out the child's flame, and thank you very much, and good night, a good day to everyone who's been watching on YouTube. Thank you.